Hi, Craig.
What up, nerds? Welcome to Ethnos.
Welcome to our podcast. Welcome to season 1 of our podcast. Welcome to the season of our podcast that's about the surface of Jhoutai. We have a podcast now. It's great. So we're trying this out. Anyway, so the surface of Jhoutai. Jhoutai is one of the two cradle worlds of Ethnos. The other is Eden, otherwise known as Earth. Jhoutai is home to a alien species called the Varen, who made another alien species called the Sasashin. We'll touch on them a bit, but this is mostly about the geography of their world because as they expand out to new worlds and colonize new planets, they use the ecology from their world as a basis for that terraformation. And we figure it's good to see what that planet looks like so that we can see how it shapes the people on it, how it shapes the worlds they make, how it shapes their culture, all of that.
So here's how it's gonna go. We've got a whole bunch of world building done on the region of Jhoutai we're talking about today, which is Dar'ru.
Mhm.
But we are now getting into the point of Jhoutai where we don't have everything like fleshed out as much as we would like. So a lot of this podcast is not only to explore what we have already, but you'll probably hear us going over some new concepts today as well. And who knows, we might generate a canon character or formations or two right here live. So it's very exciting. I think it's. Let's get into introductions. Who the heck are you?
I am Jacqueline Animal. I am the creator of Ethnos. I started it when I was super young and haven't been able to put it down. And it's gone through many evolutions. And its current evolution is that we're wrapping it up for a tabletop setting. And you are my co-author. You are.
Dar'ru. No, my name is Baron. I've been working on Ethnos for a long time. I've been the co-developer officially for about 3 years now, but I've been a part of Ethnos. So, woo!
Yeah. All right. I don't know at what point we stop adding preambles to these, but that'll
No,
probably be one of the last ones because
the next one will just be,
dive in.
hello, I'm Adam All, the narrator, Adam All, the director of Ethnos.
Anyway,
There you go. Let's go.
Yeah. So, where are we talking about today?
We are talking about Dar'ru, which is the frozen north of Jhoutai.
Mm-hmm. Every place has to have their frozen north, right?
Absolutely, because there is a north and a south pole on most planets.
Hey, some settings they got that planet of hats. They kind of forget about them poles.
That's true.
So anyway, the main shtick of Jhoutai as a planet is that most of the continental landmass is a fossil. It's coral that has grown over itself for millions of years, and this interacts with the geological cycles of the planet in some pretty interesting ways because the coral's not invincible, but it is very adaptive. But one place life tends to struggle to adapt, of course, is the cold. And even for coral, this is difficult. When the planet was warmer, tens of thousands of years ago, coral grew pretty far north. But the planet's pretty comfortably into a cooling phase at this point, and the poles have been growing slowly for thousands of years, taking over coral that used to thrive there, freezing it and killing it, and leaving kind of this increasingly brittle bone mass beneath the surface of the earth. The Most of the life on Dar'ru is subterranean. It's in those corallums, are what they're called, and specifically for the Dar'ru, this is called the subnivean zone, which means below the ice, below the snow. And that's where a lot of the interesting aspects of Dar'ru are, but those often branch out into the surface as well in oases of heat or in cities of stone. Tyler, why don't you read the intro to
Absolutely. The arrival into the region of Dar'ru was marked with celebration, something that other Adventines did not have the luxury of. We arrived in the tamed southern parts, where the foothills began to break into jagged icy peaks. I did not see the city, though. Apparently, I never was supposed to. No city on the surface would survive, they told me. Only after my adventures would I understand why. The entrance was a tunnel wide enough to house a passenger plane nestled on the coast of the massive lake. The mist cast from the waves froze on my cheeks, making the tunnel all the more inviting. The entire way down into the city was festooned with crafts, both synthetic and natural, grand sculptures and dioramas of ice, glowing fungal arrangements that complemented the synthetic lighting. The frozen north of that is from the Adventine Ulysses Paulson's accounts of adventuring through Ethnos. There's no, as it says, the surface of Jhoutai, or the surface of Dar'ru, is so inhospitable that it's kind of like, it's basically the Arctic. You're not going to find any greenery. You're not going to find any life out of certain pockets. The only ones that are going to be traveling those ice sheets are wandering predators and prey looking for food.
Yeah. Life comes in oases of warmth. Although there are creatures that still manage to survive up there, but they're kind of spread out.
Yeah. And those are prey for the predators that are no doubt wandering beneath.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go through the geological introduction of what Dar'ru, the region, is. This is the next part on the article that we have here. The frozen north of the Jhoutai planet, this landscape is dominated by sharp, jagged peaks ground to a point by wind and storms. At the lower points, massive glaciers carve the landscape. Beneath the ice lies a very large subnivean zone where many unique life forms have evolved to survive in the tumultuous environment. Most glaciers flow into the frigid sea, where they form the largest freshwater body on the planet. Awesome. God. I don't know why I always have a weakness for mountain ranges and kind of colder places. So I would love to see Dar'ru. I don't think I would survive it for very long.
No, it's not a place that's good for surviving. Not so much for predatory reasons, although that's certainly a problem, as it is for the fact that, cold is just one of the most inhospitable things to try and live in.
Yep, you would freeze within minutes.
Speaking of, we can discuss some of the phenomena of Dar'ru. So what can happen to you if you're outside or if you're walking around. Obviously, you've got the naturals, the snowstorms, windstorms, stuff like that. But something that happens a lot in Dar'ru that makes the terrain especially difficult is that as snowstorms and rainstorms form up north, there's spore clouds often that waft up from the south from all the coral and fungus down there. And the nasty thing about particulate storms like that is that when they mix with snowstorms and rainstorms and come down with it, they tend to cause slush more than like standing snow or ice. And what ends up happening is a lot of these areas in Dar'ru have slush ponds or slush lakes under a layer of fresh powder. So it can look like you're just about to embark across an open flat field, and suddenly you're 6 feet deep in slushy ice, uh, basically frozen quicksand, which is terrible.
I mean, the good news is you're going to be pretty well preserved.
Yeah.
They'll find you.
Haul you out.
Yeah.
Bring you back. I'm sure there'd be stories about that. Mythology.
Look, it's one of the first Nazik. There he is. He's a popsicle.
I'm just gonna leave him in a tank in my front room with the slush still.
Oh my god. Only in Ethnos.
Another danger of the surface is hypothermic bursts, which are windstorms so cold that if you were, bare out in them, it would only take you seconds to start getting frostbite. So, walk outside for more than a few moments at a time and lose your nose is not ideal. Uh, Sinkholes, because as I said, all that coral is cold and brittle and prone to caving in as ice or snow stacks up on top of it, especially if an avalanche comes down, and that can just drop the earth down into cavitations of ice or of coral, just breaking apart into itself and crumbling down. So that's always something you have to worry about. Some of them can be, meters wide, some can be just, a couple, and someone will be walking out across the snow and then you'll hear something crack and then they're gone. They just fall straight down. Super fun.
Ugh. Oh man, I did like the idea of those hyperthermic bursts from the mountains because I imagine that you'd have to have some pretty hefty suits,
Oh yeah,
like this
thermal
insane
suits.
face
Yeah.
covering. Oh, it would look awesome. I can
Little
imagine what the desert
battery
would look
just
like.
generating heat off of you the whole time.
Yeah, that'd be great. You got like a little heating pad. Oh man. Um, did we talk
Yeah,
about the Significant Gales too?
no, so that was all the above ground stuff.
Yeah.
But as the sinkholes kind of imply, there's a lot more going on down and through the Subnivian zone are usually the deeper you go into the coral, the bigger the chambers are, because as the coral kind of crumbles and uh, ages over time, it fossilizes in a sense of it kind of atrophies, where coral that isn't as load bearing will kind of fall away first. I don't know if that makes sense, but it leaves these big vaulted rooms basically towards the bottom. And that makes for, pretty good areas to build in if you can make sure that all that coral really is stable and not badly formed or something. But the downside of being all the way down there is that you're really close to the tidal zone where since the coral forms a lot of the landmass, but so much of the coral is hollow, most landmass on Jhoutai has ocean somewhere below it. And a lot of these regions of Dar'ru, at least until you get so far north that coral has never grown there, have these big chambered areas called the Subnivian. And a lot of them are interconnected, going on for hundreds or thousands of kilometers. And because of that, because of the tidal shift over such a large area, that still creates weather down there. And you can get windstorms and
You
mist
get
rain.
pressure systems, right?
You
That
get
just
that pressure
flow
system.
underground.
Yeah. And that can get you significant gales, which is where, you get frigid bursts of wind being sucked down from the north or heat pushing up from the south. And the heat feels nice, but it comes with all sorts of problems of introducing a sudden like burst of warmth to somewhere that's cold. That's how things tend to shatter. So yeah, living there requires a lot of know-how of geology, and thankfully, since they have magic, their magic allows them to go in and strengthen a lot of those structures. And uh, also because of their location, it's pretty safe from invasion. Um, but
I think it'd be safe to say that these Subnivian gales are what allow the Subnivian zone to be so
yeah,
alive in Daru because it's what's bringing warmth and moisture, and most likely there's probably plants that travel through these
hmm
through these windstorms, or I mean, it could even be points where it's like you get this sudden burst of heat, and the additional heat causes basically a rainstorm from the ceiling,
hmm
which would be crazy. Oh man, that's so cool.
I think it would be a very misty rain. I don't think it would be heavy drops. There would be spots for sure, but that would be like streams coming off of any downward points in the roof, like stalactites, rather than a uniform, even cloud of rain. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm kind of curious because I have heard of caves being big enough to have little rainstorms in them, and I wonder how those rainstorms, like, are they droplets of rain, or is it very a liberal definition of rainstorm?
I think it's definitely more the fact that you know how when you get out of a hot shower into a cold room, the water condenses
Yeah.
on all the surfaces and just starts dripping down, and that can go
Yes.
so fast that it can feel like a rainstorm.
But that'd be so cold. It might be warm in the room and then just very chilly rain
You'd
coming
get
down.
basically snow runoff from the ceiling. Terrible. Oh god. Be like, oh look, it's raining outside. It's so nice and oh god, and you just get the first drop.
Yeah, I don't think people up there tend to wear like tank tops or anything like that. You get that trickle of water on the back of your neck.
They have a special building that you can wear tank tops in. Uh,
The tank top house.
their ends are super heated.
Oh, definitely.
Oh man,
Um, I always picture the Nazik as kind of having something like well, I think this is something interesting that Nepal has that I'd like to see Nazik have a similar tradition to. But in Nepal, there's tea houses everywhere, and they're sort of like I mean, the only way I can think to describe them is they remind me of the purpose of a tavern in fantasy, or I mean, I guess a tavern in general, but like it is a place for people who are often like going deeper into the mountains or up to remote areas to stop and, you know, have tea, have a place to rest, and collect themselves before they go up the mountain. And I feel like in Dar'ru, it would be very important to have places where everyone can heat up together. That would just be like tantamount to a public service for some people. Obviously, they you know want you to pay, but I think the general view of hospitality is like share your heat with each other.
yep. And seeing that'd be a cool story to have of having to travel over the surface, and then every now and then you. It almost reminds me of what's that game that came out? The mail game. Um, Kojima did it.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, how in that game there was basically outposts scattered everywhere for supplies and people who were staking it out. So having a network of those but instead, you go there and it's like, all right, come on in,
Yeah,
get you a meal. Did you bring anything that you could trade with us,
and a
et cetera,
Monster
et cetera.
energy drink.
And a Monster Energy drink. Yep.
Death Stranding, that was the one. Thank you,
Thank you.
BB.
Just seeing it, it's funny to imagine a Nazik in the middle of a snowstorm with drinking like a Monster Energy. Hashtag not sponsored.
As
But
I'm
Monster,
literally drinking a Monster right now.
Monster, if you want in on this ethnos thing, you only have to listen to our podcast.
I am. All the high school writing I did about it, this was definitely fueled by Monster binges.
Yeah, it's pretty much all college too. But anyways, we're getting off tack.
That's true.
So,
So within Daru, there
yeah,
are major subregions. Daru kind of encompasses this whole Arctic area, but there's uh, the Daru actually borders quite a few countries along its southern border, and if they, well, I guess everywhere's their southern border. They're the Arctic.
yeah,
Uh, so terrestrially, they border Aempus, Valdutan, and Khatum. Khatum was the subject of our previous stream, and ocean-wise, to the south, they border Vera, which is the continent from which Saphantic life grew out of. The Varen evolved there, tried to move to the mainland, struggled for a long time, got in some roots, but it was really after they created the Sazashi that they were able to fully colonize and take over the mainland. And the Nazik were the ones best suited to Daru. So anyway, the regions of Daru. We've talked about the Subnivian a bit, which is Dar'ru's underworld. As Jhoutai continues the millennia-long march into a global cooling trend, ice spreads outwards from the poles out over the ancient coral, killing it. Though the coral is dead, its corallums remain, a refuge for life beneath the ice. That's the Subnivian. Um, but you also have a region called the Thunderhead Glaciers, which is where there's a ice shelf coming out over coral, and it has just continued to crush and collapse that coral into a giant glacial lake. And you can frequently hear, several times a year, that's their seismic activity is the cavitation of glaciers as subnivian gales push heat up through the bottom of them, or the collapse of the coral as the glacier just slowly crushes through it all. Uh, to the east of that, there's a region called the Slush Flat. It's fed partially by the waters of the Thunderhead Glaciers as well as another glacier to the north of it. It's a lake that is covered in a crust of slush and ice. It's often you can't see the water of the lake because of the covering, and it's pretty suicidal to try and walk or drive out over it because you don't know what regions have frozen solid and what regions are going to fall through with you because the gravel caused by the graveling of the slush has made it so that even when it freezes into ice, it's not necessarily good at load bearing because it's not a strong cohesive structure. It's all just everything's kind of clinging onto each other, ready to shear in weird ways. Uh, to the southern end of that slush flat is a artificial mountain range called Osan's Jaw, which the Varen put up to hold back all that slush, and basically a giant natural dam. And below that is a clean lake that is one of the biggest. Well, it's the second biggest freshwater lake on Jhoutai, but it's connected subterranean to the biggest one, which is just a little bit to the west of it. And that one's fed by the Thunderhead glaciers as well. They've The bottom of those lakes have largely been filled in over time, either by sediment or by artificial process of casters going down there and sealing it in because they need fresh water. When the whole continental surface is porous and water drains down from above to below, fresh water is if you don't have it, you're not going to have farms, you're not going to have life. So these glaciers feed so much of the water into these giant reservoirs that often end up being diverted all across the continent. You've got uh, countries running right along their tributaries because without that river there at their border, they're dead. And it can be very important to fight over those rivers too if they're in a land war.
Yeah, that
Uh,
is one thing that Dar'ru has a lot of bargaining chips with the rest of the world is freshwater supply. I imagine that they could make quite the deals with neighboring countries.
yeah, it's also a good way for them to get bullied into a war.
That's
They,
true.
I mean, taking Dar'ru is difficult, but I imagine fending them off isn't exactly the hardest either. That's why Dar'ru is more famed for special forces and assassins than they are for infantry.
Hard to gather a standing army in a place as cold as that.
Yep. So that's the major regions. There's also uh, the tallest peak, I believe, is in. Let me check that. Yeah, the tallest peak
Is, is that the
is
one,
there.
the Steps to God or whatever it is?
Yeah. So the both of those glacier ranges are part of a watershed runoff from a massive mountain called the Steps to God, which is basically it's a range that's like the Alps, uh, and to one side that's where it borders the ocean that borders Vera, and then to the other side that's where it's or to its you know glacier lakes on the main continental side is what it feeds there. So most of the northern hemisphere of the main continent is fed by this mountain range, the Steps to God. And yeah, it is steep and it is also actual stone. It is not coral. And it is probably it is unknown how much of it has been tunneled through just because it's the basis of so many cities. Like they'll just carve right into its roots. Uh, since their meta allows you to move dirt and rock pretty well if you have strong casters. So earth moving isn't the hardest thing to do, especially when they can just fill these giant stone chambers with warmth and not lose it because the stone's not going to take much of that warmth away from a room.
If I may ask, how how many cities do you think are within? Is this structure, this mountain, basically just turned into a giant city at this point?
Uh, I suppose I it might be. At least it's been they've had 5 or 6 thousand years to work on it. So, it's kind of an
And
oversight on my part. But yeah, they should have. Um, it's definitely I mean, that would certainly make them an imposing presence. You look to the north and you see this Alp range on the horizon, and you just know that that's where they are.
well, I'm sure in the time of the packed area, it's all lit up, and even in the like, it's renowned for you're walking through a snowstorm, and still miles and miles away, even through the whiteout, you can see the occasional twinkle of the mountain range in the distance that you're heading towards.
Considering that the Nazic were practically left for dead when they were given that landmass, I could definitely see that being a bit of a spiteful, we did it anyway uh,
Yeah,
sort of mentality because basically, so quick history lesson: the Varen made the Suzashi. The Suzashi weren't really fond of being treated as slaves, so they politely killed a lot of the Varen procession and took over the mainland and eventually took over the world, basically, and made it their own. But when after the revolution, there was a lot of argument over uh, who would get what land, how it would be separated, and it ended up being separated a lot along the bounds of like, well, you're this kind of Sashi, so you should mostly live up there. A choice which has not gone well for them in the long run, because it ends up with a lot of border fighting and racism. But the Nazic, who were seen as pretty weak contributors to the revolution, because they got bad orders, got told to go up north, didn't get better orders to on where to move, and ended up almost freezing to death up there. That's where they got stuck also when the revolution was over, and they made pretty good by it. It was hard to work with. It's not easy to live in, and it's not easy to move out of because the bordering lands are either extremely rocky uh, terrain or uh, you know tundra. But they still managed to do well by it, and yeah, I could definitely see them turning those mountains into a trophy of a wonder. And
well,
that's where they could have the fire plinths, which are these basically giant stone fire. I don't know what they're called, like when it's a bowl of fire.
A brazier.
A brazier, yeah. Some of the mountaintops are brazier shaped, which is honestly the uh, art we're using for the cover of Dar'ru shows them.
So I'm gonna bring something up because we haven't talked about them at all. The
Hmm.
Phaetra.
Oh, okay, yeah,
We've talked a lot about one of the Sophantic life that live in Dar'ru, but we kind of neglected to talk about the second one, which is a variant or kind of Varen who go by Phaetra.
yeah.
So
So
tell us
the
about them.
the Phaetra predate the Suzashi, both on the mainland and as a species. They are a offshoot mix of Phaetra and Chea, which are two, not Phaetra, Pheo and Chea, which are two kinds of Varen. Um, and the fact that there was this kind of new Varen that came out of those bloodlines didn't go well in Vera at the time because Vera historically has had a few eugenic-y problems, and they ended up exiling or hunting down a lot of the Phaetra. And the Phaetra moved, basically spread out wherever they could on the globe. They didn't stick to many places, but they did stick to a few. And one of the places they stuck to was the kind of the warmer end of Faridaru. And the way they did that is they mostly kept to the Subnivian, but would come out in the warmer months to hunt and farm on the lower hills and valleys where they were pretty secluded. They did pretty good by that. There were still, of course, plenty of dangers, but a lot of the big ruthless predators tended not to go to those specific spots. The Facia managed to find one of the safer spots on Jhoutai and kind of settle in there. And then when the Nazik came, they had a pretty hard time because this was just after the Varen Revolution and Suzashi weren't being too kind to Varen all the time. And they ended up being helped out by Brahmians, because they're Arabi from the south, which that's actually a whole big chunk of lore on its own. But Phaetra themselves managed to be very resourceful. They make great diviners, so that helped. They were able to kind of steer their way around in the dark of the Subnivian and often be, quiet predators themselves, even though they're very small. Let's see, what else about them? Why don't you, what do you think I should bring up about them?
Well, I mean, they had their own cities and their own structure, and when the Nazik came up, there was as you said, there was a lot of divide between the two until eventually, during before the current tabletop RPG. I'm getting a little bit of echo from you, by the way, Jacqueline.
That's weird.
This maybe just all right. Maybe it's just me, but so they didn't really combine forces until the Blood Snow Offensive, which takes place how many years before the current Banner era?
Most of the lore from that era is about 1800 years before the Banner era.
So quite a ways before, which means that that giant city and those mountain ranges that we were talking about were probably entirely Nazik until 1800 years ago, at which point the Phaetra just and the Nazik, I'm assuming, just kind of integrated together in all their cities.
In a lot of places, the Faridaru was a confederacy for a very long time, even after that. But they did eventually convert mostly to Yukaism and ditch being Malizic, which is what made them separated states and made them very aggressive. There was a lot of spite written into the Malizic's government. So once the Malizic were pushed out culturally. The Malizic being this very kind of death culty,
Cannibal
hyper.
cult.
They have cannibalism is a sacrament for them, even if some of them like treat it like, oh no, it's just it's a metaphor. But no, there's actual like cannibals in their midst, so be wary. Thankfully, Malizic are the only reason they're not dead is because every now and then some idiot gets in his brain that he wants to bring back that, you know, mentality. Someone gets edgy and they're just like, I'm gonna bring back being Malizic. Um,
It's like
and
someone in going back, glory to Rome, and trying to start gladiator fights.
pretty much. Um, it's okay to hit that person in the head with a brick, is all I'm saying.
Aye.
Aye. Anyway, so the Facha, once they were settled in for a while, they eventually gave rise to another type of variant called the Vodalkin, which are incredible diviners. They can be trained basically to live without seeing through their eyes. They can see through the elements instead. And 99% of the time, that gives them an edge. The only time it doesn't give them an edge is that if they really go so far as to have the procedure to have their eyes replaced with crystal so that they're always seeing in like a very strong divination, they tend to lose the ability to read, the ability to see color, the ability to really see flat texture, anything like that. Like their world is they see in tactile, they see in material, but they they can see through objects, they can see liquids moving through objects, they can see heat, all that, but they can't see what we take for granted, which is, you know, the
Colors.
colors, textures, a lot of that. Letters.
The letters. So we talked a lot about the places. We talked quite a bit about the people, and the phenomenon that hit the region pretty well.
Hmm.
I know one thing that you've been working on for the last few days, trying to get some good ideas generated, and we've been kind of going through this together, is the creatures that inhabit Dar'ru. Because as we were saying in the beginning of this podcast, Dar'ru is a cold place with warmth underneath, which leads to this very strange mix of like a subnibian zone and the harshness, except 100 times more so, of our own Antarctica here on Earth.
I think
So
it's about as harsh as our Arctic. It's just there's a lot more people motivated to try and live there.
that's true. Fair enough. Well, there was a bunch of people who we sent there. It would be like if we were like, "Hey, Australians, go live on Antarctica instead."
We just want to see what happens. Get up
Yeah, pretty much. I'm like, wow, you guys are doing such a good job. You can have your own country up there too.
there.
Uh, but the creatures are a million times worse than what there is in our own Antarctic. I would say that. I mean, we have something called the Zweig worms,
Zweigworm.
so, which sounds terrible. Um,
So yeah, I'm gonna
yeah,
I'm gonna introduce them. I'm proud of them.
please.
So these are inspired a bit by bobbit worms. If any of you know what a bobbit worm is, then you already are concerned. A Zweigworm is a tunneling worm. It is up to 13 meters in length. It navigates through the slush, navigating by sensitive dorsal bristles on its back, and protected against the cold by rubbery flesh and blubbery fat. They circle prey underneath the slush to break up the slush to make it mix and to make the person or prey sink. And then once you're down in it, they'll squeeze it. Well, they'll attack you, they'll constrict you, they'll bite you, and then they consume their prey as quickly as possible after that, usually whole, so that they can take all their body heat.
That's
Yeah,
terrifying. That's
And
Uh,
they nest in caves. So if you think you're safe just by avoiding the slush, then no, they come out.
that's just so terrifying. You just be walking and all you hear is a scream that just gets cut off as they're just like, nope, gone. And then it's just underneath the ice again. And it's silent as heck.
Yep.
Ugh.
I also kind of imagine them doing the like shark breach thing sometimes where they'll just swim down really far and then just launch up through thin slush on something to really just shock it.
They're bad. They're bad. They're big. They've got big, sharp, pointy things all over their face. And they're not just teeth.
Yeah,
And
there's a reference on the article. If listeners want to go look it up, go to our Ethnos Codex on World Anvil and search up Dar'ru, which is DAR apostrophe RU. And towards the bottom, you'll see the illustration of it. Our artist Oscar does amazing sketches and art. I stole one of his sketches because he did a bunch of different bugs, and it's like we need to use these to be fun. And I'm like, but they look good, so here they are. And it's a worm with basically radially situated around its mouth are six large hooked mandibles. So it's basically got a hand for a face and a garbage disposal for a mouth.
ugh, yeah, it's nasty. It's evil. It will. So, did we talk about how they hunt?
Yeah, the way they sit under the slush and kind of circle prey that they want to drag into it, and then they will constrict them
Ugh,
while they're cold. They hunt a bit like an anaconda. If an anaconda, instead of lashing out, was more about sucking you under the ground first. There's a few things you could compare that to. You got the dune worms, you've got the thresher moth from the Mass Effect, antlions from Half-Life,
Tremors.
Tremors. Um,
Tremors is a
but
classic one.
but instead of sitting down there with its mouth open, pulling you down, it's more that it's using its whole body to stir. I would also compare it to the way that I think whales do it, where they'll do that kind of bubble ring to keep prey in. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
or I would compare it to orcas, where they're using the ice as their weapon against you. Um,
So these are how common do you think these would be in Dar'ru?
Full-sized ones, decently rare. I mean, that's like having a giant shark. I imagine they're decently predatory, or not predatory, decently territorial. So you'd have kind of groups of them with one big one somewhere in it, an alpha.
They
Not
would
too
they would
much of a pack behavior so much as a Zweigworm is probably hostile towards another Zweigworm that is around its size.
imagine the footage of that battle, like the
Uh,
nature footage,
mhm.
stuff like that. Oh,
I think they're more likely to attack each other if the other one is like slow from eating something.
well, yeah, it's going to attack for food mostly, either
Yeah,
protecting its own source of food or
yeah.
taking
Or
what
if
the other has.
or if it's the big ones are dangerous to the small ones because they probably just swallow them whole.
Oy.
Yeah. So uh
So those are
for
the
that
big
reason,
guys.
yeah. Well, they thin each other's herds pretty decently, but I would still imagine that if you're near slush, you're probably near like if you're near any consistent source of slush, like not just, oh, we had a slush storm and there's like a 5 foot, 2 meter wide, whatever, slush pond. No, I mean like if there's a lake near you with slush, you're in danger of being near Zweigworms. There will be Zweigworms in a slush lake.
We did have a question about the sweet worms that will get answered before we move on to some other creatures because there's a few that we have. Artemis asks, you mentioned that they steal the heat and they eat things quickly in order to do that. Is it really that important, and can they really obtain that much warmth from a body?
It's definitely a benefit. Warmth isn't the easiest thing to come by there, and cold is not something that's good to eat. Uh, if a Zweigworm was to let you freeze solid, that would be like drinking ice water while you're already hypothermic, or like they say, if you're surviving in the wilderness, don't just eat snow, melt it first. And the same thing applies to anything that's Zweigworm eats. Is the warmer it is, like the more digestible for one, because digestion usually requires heat, and the more they're going to be able to take advantage of all the calories their prey was already burning.
So, to answer your question, they don't necessarily steal heat. Like, that's not their purpose of eating things quickly, but they need to eat things while it's still warm.
Yep. So yeah, if you're I have a feeling that um they might have a small set of tetrachromic eyes somewhere around their maw, which allows them to see heat once they're on the surface.
So, a good way to hide from is sweet worm. I can't say that word very well. Is
Mm.
is basically freeze yourself or have something that masks your heat.
Yeah, yeah, they're not the hardest creature to avoid because you know where they're gonna be, and you know what it takes for them to see you. Don't walk on slush. Don't have too much of your body exposed, and just don't go near those areas, and you're generally fine. But if you do go to near those areas, then yeah, you're in danger.
Your food.
Yep, your food's shaped.
So, we've talked about big old wormy worms. Now we're going to talk about much smaller moly worm.
Yeah, so you've also got the gravedigger moleworms, which tend to be only the size of a finger to the size of an arm. They don't go in slush; they go in the snow, and they're less about um, trying to capture a target as they move, and more about they'll dig pitfalls and make their warrens in the side of them, so that when something falls in the pitfall, they can all just kind of descend on it and kill it. So
Yeah,
they're
it's
yeah. So the video game experience of that would be falling in a hole and seeing a bunch of eyes, and then hearing them all like screech at you and start shooting out of the walls.
and then just start biting.
Hmm. But if you're wearing like thick armor or whatever, you're probably fine. Just don't let one get in your clothes. It's a bit like getting swarmed by scarabs, little land piranhas.
Yeah,
um, there is also a decent amount of frutas, which are the giant crustacean bugs, down in the deeper parts of the Scandinavian. A lot of them are pale, kind of uh, thick-shelled, and generally blind, and small. A lot of the creatures that far north, one of the mercies, the small mercies, is that there aren't many huge creatures besides the wigworms and the sauerkraut, uh, because it's just too cold. I mean, nothing that flies can usually get enough air there unless it's like feathered, and the amount of feathered creatures on Jhoutai is fairly limited.
that is
So,
it's just a natural population control for larger creatures. You cannot get enough energy
yep,
consistently to let things like that survive.
yep.
So
Maintaining that kind of body mass is hard. Even the wigworms, they go pretty, high, and they go into hibernation while they're waiting for prey sometimes. And I can imagine that a common cause of death for them is sat in slush too long and got frozen in place, and just that's it. Imagine just digging down and you just see his wigworm. You're like, oh, Oh, thank God, it's good.
It's like you just put your shovel in. It's like that scene from Trevor's where all the blood comes oozing out from the jackhammer. It's like, and then that'd be terrifying. That you mentioned the sauerkraut really briefly there.
hmm Yeah, so they.
Sauerkraut's my favorite ethnos creature. Not gonna lie, I think they're one of the fan favorites too.
Mhm.
Um, and one thing we haven't gotten to explore yet, which it looks like we have time to do it now, is what makes the sauerkraut, like what makes the polar sauerkraut different than a regular sauerkraut.
So I figured there's actually a couple different variants. One would be more in the line of what you would see as kind of like a polar bear, where you've got the big boy. Um, isn't really made for moving fast through the water because doesn't getting in the water is not really a great idea in general. It's a good way to freeze. So whatever time they spend in the water is brief. But they are very enduring, where they have that blubber, they have thick fur, giant tiger bears.
I
And then
imagine they have these very dense, wide paws
I could see that, yeah.
because they need to be able to walk on snow, like Canadian lynxes, and how they have like that fur that comes out in those really wide hands that just poof,
Yeah, murder mittens.
murder mittens.
Big ol' fluffy murder mittens.
But they're
Um,
stocky, they're lumbering, they're rare. I'm pretty sure they have the food sense of a polar bear, in which if it's made
yeah,
of meat, it's food.
yeah, lots of digging down and grabbing things out of the ice, or I could see them getting good at luring sweetworms out,
Oh yeah,
or
like
even
they
just
just
being so like imagine one walking very slowly over the slush ice, and it's got its head like pointed straight down, its ears perked out, its jaw open, because one of the features of the sauerkraut is that they have hollows in their jaw that make it so that when they open their mouth, their entire skull becomes like an ear. It's very sensitive, and when they open their mouth, they can basically catch sound in it, like you catch sound in the cup of your ear, and they can listen. And one of the things, that's how they'll hunt prey that's underground, and so it becomes a contest between the Zweigworm and the Sauerkraut of who can get the jump on who. Because once that Sauerkraut makes the jump and breaks through the ice and just, bites off the head of that Zweigworm, it's gonna have a nice big meal.
Well,
And
the other thing is, like, I imagine Sauerkraut not only would be good at like trapping them, but they'd also like get small animals,
oh yeah,
something, and then just try to, or even just rocks,
yeah,
and try to like roll them into the slush so the worm comes out and tries to grab it, and then the Sauerkraut jumps on the worm. It would be amazing because the thing about Sauerkraut is they're unlike a polar bear. Sauerkraut have the intelligence of like a dog.
they have uncanny intelligence.
Yeah,
I
like
wouldn't even describe it quite as a dog. I think uncanny intelligence is.
it gets people worried because they think, oh, these things are probably a million natural years from an evolution of
Yeah,
becoming a sapient life.
yeah, that's why they were used. So the Varen took a bunch of different breeds of Sauerkraut and basically used magic to graft that body parts onto themselves, and that's how they made the first generations of Suzashi before they were stable enough to reproduce. And so these aren't the ones that are used to make the Nazik. The ones that were used to make the Nazik are at higher altitudes, and they are smaller and faster. They were actually probably used to make the Hizarabi a bit too, because I imagine them being extremely agile.
That and it's one of the closest places to Vera, so it's probably one of the first discovered species of Sauerkraut thusly.
That's
one
true.
of the ones easily used.
Yeah. Well, they trying to land on Vera, because the thing about the ones higher up the mountain is they're also, unlike the big guys, they tend to be more pack predators and pursuit predators. So mix that with uncanny intelligence, and you can see why they are, the kind of the gods of the slope, where they just have that ability to blend in and then come rushing down from the stone and look like they're running flat out down a mountainside towards you. And it's not the one you see that's going to kill you.
No, it's the one that's already behind you.
So,
Jeez.
yeah, I love them. They're great. It's just like, let's take a cat and what else worse can we give it? And
Well,
that's
we
the
always compare
Sazakrat.
the Sazakrat to a basically a tiger gorilla, but
Yeah,
way bigger.
depending on the
So,
species, yeah. The one I
yeah,
usually picture as like a default, the one that's on the article, is like the one that was used for Ka. So yeah,
yeah.
they're definitely a well, it's a mix. I imagine the polar one probably went into the Ka a bit too.
But
That
yeah, but
that strength.
either way, they're like it's so you have multiple types of Sazakrat, multiple subgenres of Sazakrat up here. You got all these worms. I know below the surface, we're almost out of time,
Oh,
but there are quite a lot of fungi, and most of that fungi is what's used for the staple crops of the Nazic and the Phaecia, pretty much because it's what grow underground. Um, I
yeah,
think
lots.
Euphrates mane, which is like a type of rudus, which makes these long strands of edible, basically mucus. That's
Mhm.
another one of their main food supplies, which sounds delicious.
Yeah, a lot of their food would look very
Cold.
no, just it would. I think it could look pretty tasty. It'd make a great stir fry. You've got so many different kind of veggie looking mushrooms to chop up and cook,
Well,
and
and
then
with Euphrates mane, the idea is you can use those strands to basically make either noodles or any sort of like protein dish. Like I think one of the things I had it on is they used to make burgers, like hamburger meat, out of
are they more protein or starch?
protein.
Okay. Yeah, and you can do better. Can't do noodles so much with proteins, I think. Yeah, that you need starches, but
Mm.
I might be wrong.
But
Uh,
anyways, we
yeah.
got 1 minute left. This is where we should probably start closing. We
Yes.
didn't even get to go over the landmarks today. We could. Do you want to go over them really quick, or?
Yeah, there's a couple of cool ones. You've got the fire plinths, which are the top of the mountains that are, made to look like giant uh braziers. And they are, if you see one go out, that's cause for alarm because the fire itself is usually the top of like a very large fire spell that's being used to warm the inside of that plinth where people tend to live. And then there's a lot of forbidden markers, which are, anything you see out across the snowscape that is a warning of like, don't step here, don't walk here. I imagine there's like a very developed culture of leaving behind markers for each other. Like could just be having these very long, skinny poles that you just kind of javelin out onto the ice to mark a spot with like a red stick and say, "Hey, something dangerous here." Maybe with a little flag hanging off of it that indicates what. And that's just something that travelers do a lot when they're walking out there because it's going to be lost over time anyway and decay. So it's not like it's a big deal if they leave a bunch behind.
Cool. Yes. Love it.
Yes. Yeah,
So
and then there's Ozon's Jaw is one landmark that I talked about, which was the holding back the slush to create clean water lakes, and then the other one is Hierophant Palace, which is actually below Slush Lake. Um, the Varen procession built it way, way long time ago before even this they made the Suzashi, or no, sorry, during the Suzashi before the Suzashi Revolution. and it's an old home, which is basically a living golem city. And it has been sunken below the ice, and it's very hard to get to. And the last time someone went down to it, they brought back some ancient Baron magics that changed the shape of the world, just as they had back before the Suzashi had the revolution. So pretty important site.
The Shelt were not too happy.
Yeah, no, the Shelt, who were the ones who were tasked with making sure that that sort of tech never got back out into the world, were very unhappy about it.
They're like, war? War? Yes, war. Uh, okay. So we'll take some questions now. I see some people are writing some out, but I do have one already lined up, which is a question I have about surviving as a civilization. How does trade work in Dar'ru? I'm not sure if the giant rail tracks that connect the rest of the world would work out in Dar'ru. Is there massive tunnels that they have to go through?
Um, the trains and there's so much maintenance that goes into Daru. Yeah, it has to be an underground tunnel, very heavily maintained. Daru makes a lot of solid casters, and it imports a lot of them. If you're a solid mage and you're good at moving around stone and earth, you can usually find great employment among them because they have these huge underground complexes that need lots of watch and care because the ground is very hard to, it's hard to keep it consistent for more than 20 or 30 years at a time before something needs to be, shifted. And but they do it because that's how they have to get things in and out. Like, yeah, now that the world is a lot more integrated, they could leave, but this is their home now. They've had it for 6,000 years. They're gonna make it work.
And my second question is based on that. So, as we everyone here knows about sled dogs and the the impact that they have had on living in cold places for quite a long time.
Mhm.
I don't think I've really heard of a Sazasi creature that has been tamed or domesticated besides the Ailman hounds, and I'm wondering if there's anything you could think of that would serve as like an above ground transport that's like maybe organic and a little more reliable.
Well, the Suzashi love their airships.
Mm.
And they would probably have some pretty darn good ones for navigating. The trick would be, calling the day. You got to go on a clear day. You can't go in these hours because that's when, the thermal pressure is going to change and you're going to lose too much altitude. Just like with seaplanes, you have these people, or, like mail carrier planes to Alaska. You have these people who are very qualified for it.
Yeah.
Um, for short range things or for slower journeys, um airships all the way. In terms of creatures, like a pack creature, um somewhere I had some pretty large herbivores that would
That's
probably qualify, but I think if they have them, they're mostly imported.
yeah. Okay, so we have some questions from the audience here. Potential freebie concept. You mentioned the warning landmarks of sticks with cloth to identify bad things. Is there a particular place where it's like a forest of these sticks with no consensus on what the actual danger is?
I really like that idea,
Me
actually,
too.
where
It's
it's
just
just
like a wall of warnings, and no one goes in there because no one knows what's there.
I could see that. I could definitely see it in places where something really terrible happened, especially if it was magically related. Like there might be an old home near there, and everyone has weird things happen to them every now and then, but no one can really pinpoint it. Or it could just be kind of a tradition, and that tradition has given people a superstition where it's like, a few people did it once, and then a bunch of other travelers came by and thought that would be funny, and then 100 years later, everyone's terrified to go there because it's
It's like Dark Souls.
yeah.
There's just a bunch of messages on the ground that say, try finger but hole, and you're like, gosh darn it, stop! I just want to get to the Magic City. Um, so I do see your question, Arcane Crafter. This world has magic. Do you have magic related weather effects?
Somewhat. So, meta is a unnatural force. It
Yeah.
is. It comes out of the gods. And anyone can become a god if they achieve a certain level of self-mastery. Gods are in high demand because if you have a god in your city or a population of gods in your city, then you have a constant source of meta. The more meta you have, the more you can use it to cast spells, the more you can use it to have automated spells, the more you can make your society lean on it. There's entire countries where your tax for living there is that any meta you're not using throughout the day is quietly siphoned off of you to power things. And like people are fine with that. I'm not a great mage. I use a spell maybe to cool off my house once a day. Fine, let the government have the rest. Um, Whatever. That's a mindset.
It's meta tax pretty much.
Yeah. So
I don't think that
but
basically means there isn't going to be a lot of natural
no,
phenomenon.
well, kind of. So there's a few different ways that it's interlinks with phenomena. Is um, even though the meta can only really affect our world when it is invoked, our world doesn't it affect the meta. So in places where you have a bunch of gods living in a basin, that basin will fill with the unseen force of magic that can then be tracked by mages and turned into usable spells. Um, but it will fill up just like a chalice. It will hold into the bowl of the basin until eventually enough meta fills up for it to spill over and get out into the wilderness and kind of get lost in the cracks. For this reason, there's a lot of meta deserts on Jhoutai where meta just kind of falls down through the earth. And now that there's been thousands and thousands of years of people knowing magic and living on the surface, that's not as big of a problem because there's enough magic that's generally gotten free that if you're wandering around down the wilderness, you can generally count on the fact that you'll be able to pull some meta from the environment to cast with. But just as with many uh, material aspects of our physical realm, temperature does have an effect. And when it's cold, meta tends to not really stick around. It gets kind of pushed out. It follows the warmth and it ends up sinking. So, the big, tall mountains, the steps to God mountain range. If you go to the top, there's not really much magic up there. And if you go down, there's a lot more magic in the valleys. Um, so in that regard, it's the economy of getting meta where you need it to go that does have an effect. The meta itself doesn't often affect the environment unless people have built like atmospherancy towers, which are basically big giant wands pointed at the sky. But meta itself is a very inert force unless acted upon by a caster.
All right. I think that's a good point to leave it off. Hopefully, that was a good answer for the question. I enjoyed it. So, I hope you guys enjoyed exploring Far Dar'ru with us. It's cold. It stinks. A lot of things will kill you, but I'm sure it's beautiful.
Oh yeah,
Um,
gorgeous.
if you want to learn more, you can go to our World Anvil, which is worldanvil.com/w/ethnos. Or you can come by our Discord, which is discord.gg/ethnos. We will be doing another one of these soon. If you want to see our previous episodes, seasons 1 through 3, or episodes 1 through 3 are up on Spotify, and we are going to be uploading them to YouTube.
We already have actually.
Yep. Oh, we already did upload them to YouTube. So
Yep,
make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. But yeah, feel free to stop by the Discord. If you want to support us monetarily, you can always hit us up at Patreon. Ethnos Studios is our handle. And yeah, I think that's our spiel. We hope you enjoyed.
Yeah, I did. So that's what's important, I guess.
Yeah, we had fun. Who cares if you did? No, I'm just kidding. We do this because we want to introduce Ethnos to you guys. So
yeah, I enjoy talking about it. I think that's my favorite way to engage with it is to just answer questions about it. So Feel
Bye.
free also for those listening within the Discord, always any question you have, even if it's just like kind of a meme. I don't care. I like answering questions. I'll give you a serious answer to a meme question if I feel like you want to know an answer. So
Yeah. Exactly.
absolutely. Love talking about it. Won't shut up about it if you get me going. Will shut
We've
up
been
about it.
talking about it for 10 years,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we still talk about it just as much. All right, guys. Have a
All
good
right.
day, good night, whenever you're listening, and see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, Craig.
Bye.